The Whispers of Time, Chapter 1, A Whisper from the Past. The morning. It arrived quietly. Too quiet. Eleanor Vance, 70 years young but with eyes that held centuries of unspoken stories, traced the dust motes dancing in the sunbeams filtering through the tall, arched windows of her Charleston home. The house itself breathed history. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the sea breeze through the ancient live oaks outside carried echoes of generations. A legacy. A burden. Her fingers, gnarled with age but still graceful, hovered over a worn, leather-bound volume on the mahogany table. It wasn't just old. It was ancient. Fragile. The leather, once dark, had faded to a mottled brown, cracked like parched earth. The pages? Oh, the pages. Thin as onion skin, brittle, threatening to disintegrate with a single breath. This wasn't just a diary. This was a ghost, a whisper from the past. Her great-grandmother's diary, from the Civil War. Charleston, under siege. She remembered finding it, tucked away in a false bottom of an old sea chest in the attic. Hidden. Deliberately, as if its secrets were too dangerous to face the light of day. For years, it had sat there a silent sentinel, a constant nagging presence, a puzzle with missing pieces, and recently, a desperate hope. Her son, Thomas, vanished. A lifetime ago, when he was just a boy, 6 years old, playing in the sprawling, overgrown garden behind this very house. One moment his laughter, clear as a bell, the next, silence. A horrifying, deafening silence. A void. 45 years. 45 years of searching, of praying, of waking in the dead of night haunted by his small, smiling face. The police? Fruitless. The investigations? Dead ends. The grief? A constant companion. But now, a feeling. A persistent, almost mystical pull towards this diary. A whisper in her soul. A conviction that the answers somehow lay within its crumbling pages. It sounds mad, doesn't it? A diary from the 1860s holding clues to a disappearance in the 1970s? But Eleanor had lived long enough to know that logic often bowed to the inexplicable, especially in Charleston, especially in this house. She gently, so gently, tried to turn a page. A faint crackle, a sliver of paper, like a dried leaf, detached itself and fluttered to the table. She gasped. A tear, unbidden, welled in her eye. She couldn't touch it. She couldn't. This was too precious, too vital, too fragile. She needed help. Specialist help. Someone who could extract its secrets without destroying it. Her mind immediately went to Dr. Evelyn Reed, the young, brilliant researcher from the university. Eleanor had read about her. Digital restoration of ancient texts. Revolutionary techniques. Dr. Reed was known for miracles, or so the articles claimed. A long shot, perhaps, but what did Eleanor have left to lose? Chapter 2, The Digital Alchemist. The university, a maze of modern glass and steel, a stark contrast to Eleanor's historic home. She felt a little out of place, a relic herself. Dr. Evelyn Reed's office was surprisingly cluttered, books everywhere, papers spilling from trays, a hum of computers. The air crackled with intellectual energy. Evelyn, in her late 20s, wore her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Her eyes sharp and intelligent met Eleanor's. "Mrs. Vance," Evelyn's voice was warm, professional. "Thank you for coming in." Eleanor clutched her worn leather handbag tighter. "Dr. Reed, I have something very old, very fragile. She hesitated, then pulled out a carefully padded, velvet-lined box. It was a jeweler's box, actually, not for jewels, for something infinitely more valuable. Evelyn watched, intrigued, as Eleanor slowly, almost reverently, opened the box. The diary lay nestled inside. Even in the dim light of the office, its age was palpable. A faint, earthy scent, like dried leaves and old wood, emanated from it.
Evelyn leaned closer, her breath hitched. Oh my. Her eyes widened. Is this authentic? She reached out a hand, then pulled it back, as if afraid to contaminate it. Authentic, Eleanor affirmed. Her voice was steady, despite the tremor in her hands. My great-grandmother's, from the 1860s, Charleston. Evelyn's gaze softened slightly. It's remarkable, Mrs. Vance, a true historical artifact. But its condition, she trailed off, her brow furrowed with concern. I know, Eleanor whispered. That's why I came to you. I read about your work, your digital restoration. It's extraordinary. She paused. I believe it holds a secret, something important, not just for history, for me. Her voice cracked on the last two words. Evelyn looked at Eleanor, truly looked at her, saw the pain, the desperate hope in those ancient eyes. This wasn't just a historical curiosity for Mrs. Vance. This was personal, deeply so. Mrs. Vance, Evelyn began, her tone gentle. I won't lie. This is incredibly challenging. The binding looks compromised. The paper is almost dust. Even our most advanced scanners exert some pressure, and the light, prolonged exposure could cause irreversible damage. I understand the risks, Eleanor said, her voice firm, but I have to try. I have to. It's my last hope. Evelyn sighed. The academic in her screamed caution. The human in her felt a profound empathy. All right, Mrs. Vance, I can't promise anything, but I'll do everything in my power. She gestured to a large, sterile clean room visible through a glass wall. We'll need to move it into the lab immediately. Handle it with extreme care. Eleanor felt a surge of relief so profound it almost buckled her knees. Thank you, Dr. Reed, thank you. The next few days were agonizing. Eleanor stayed at the university, mostly in the waiting area outside the lab, sipping weak coffee, her heart a frantic drumbeat in her chest. She saw Evelyn, clad in a sterile suit, carefully positioning the diary under a custom-built, ultra-low-light scanner. The air in the lab was filtered, humidity-controlled. It was like watching surgery on a living, breathing thing. Evelyn would emerge periodically, her face a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. We got the cover. First few pages scanned, Mrs. Vance. Each update was a small victory, a fragile hope. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Evelyn called her into her office. The computer screen glowed. On it, perfectly rendered, were the first few pages of the diary. The handwriting, elegant but faded, appeared as crisp and clear as if written yesterday. Eleanor gasped. It was a miracle. It's incredible, Dr. Reed, she whispered, tears blurring her vision. It is, Evelyn agreed, a tired but triumphant smile on her face. The initial scans are complete. Now the real work begins, the digital restoration, enhancing faded ink, repairing tears, reconstructing missing pieces through algorithmic inference. As the days turned into weeks, more and more pages appeared on Evelyn's screen. Eleanor spent hours in the office, mesmerized. She read her great-grandmother Eliza Vance's words, entries detailing the harsh realities of wartime Charleston, the booming cannons, the rationing, the fear, but also the resilience, the quiet strength. Eliza wrote about daily life, about neighbors, about the struggle to keep hope alive. Then Eleanor noticed something, a subtle pattern. In some entries, scattered amongst the mundane details, were strange symbols, geometric shapes, lines, not part of the regular script, and peculiar phrases, the shimmering passage, the whisper from nowhere, the hidden doorway. Dr. Reed? Eleanor pointed a trembling finger at the screen. What are these? Evelyn squinted. I noticed those. I thought they might be some kind of personal shorthand, or perhaps a form of rudimentary code Eliza used to protect sensitive information during the war?
But the shimmering passage? Eleanor pressed. It sounds almost fantastical. Evelyn shrugged. People had different ways of expressing things back then. Perhaps a metaphorical passage, or a coded reference to an escape route, a secret meeting place? Eleanor shook her head slowly. A chill, inexplicable, ran down her spine. No, it feels different. Chapter 3. The Glitch in Time. The work continued. The digital diary grew, page by digital page. Eliza's life unfolded before them, her struggles, her joys, her fears. But so did the strange symbols. They became more frequent, more complex, almost like a language. One afternoon, Evelyn called Eleanor urgently. Her voice on the phone was tight, excited. "Mrs. Vance, can you come to the lab? Immediately. Something odd has happened." Eleanor rushed over, her heart pounding. She found Evelyn staring intently at a large monitor, her brow furrowed in concentration. On the screen, a page from the diary was displayed. It was an entry from late 1864. Eliza described a particularly brutal bombardment of Charleston. The city was in ruins. Despair was rampant. But in the middle of Eliza's eloquent prose, something was wrong. A series of numbers, blinking, almost pulsing, not handwritten. They appeared digitally superimposed, a precise sequence, 32.7846 degrees north, 79.9311 degrees west. "What is that?" Eleanor whispered, her breath catching. Evelyn ran a hand through her hair. "That's what I want to know. It's not part of the original text. It's a glitch, a digital anomaly. But it's incredibly specific glitch. It's almost as if it's being projected into the data from somewhere else." Eleanor stared at the numbers. Her mind, long accustomed to the inexplicable, immediately recognized them. Coordinates, latitude and longitude. Charleston. "They're coordinates, aren't they?" she said, her voice barely audible. Evelyn's head snapped up. "You recognize them?" "I live in Charleston, Dr. Reed. I've seen enough maps." Eleanor's mind was racing. Where do they lead? Evelyn, still bewildered by the anomaly, quickly typed the coordinates into a mapping program on a separate screen. The map zoomed in. A red marker blinked. It pointed to a neglected, overgrown area on the outskirts of Charleston, an old, almost forgotten section of the city bordering marshland. And right in the middle of it, a tiny, almost imperceptible icon of a structure, a shack, an abandoned shack. "That's strange," Evelyn murmured. "That area hasn't been developed in decades, and that shack, it's not on any official city maps. It's just an old, forgotten structure." Eleanor felt a profound sense of recognition. A memory buried deep surfaced. The old Folly Shack. My grandfather, he used to tell stories about it, said it was a place of odd occurrences, whispers in the wind, strange lights at night. He always warned them to stay away, that it was cursed, or blessed, depending on who you asked. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. Her scientific skepticism warred with the undeniable strangeness of the situation. A digital glitch in an ancient diary pointing to a forgotten shack tied to local folklore. It was almost too coincidental. "Mrs. Vance, this is beyond my expertise. This is not digital restoration anymore. This is something else." "It's connected," Eleanor stated, her voice unwavering. "My son, Thomas, he vanished from our garden,
not far from where those coordinates point. The garden that borders the old Folly land. Her heart pounded. We have to go there. Now. Evelyn hesitated. Her rational mind screamed against it. This was stepping into the realm of the absurd. But the desperate look in Eleanor's eyes, coupled with the inexplicable nature of the glitch itself, convinced her. She was a scientist. She sought answers. And sometimes answers lay in unexpected places. "All right, Mrs. Vance," Evelyn said, rising. "But we proceed with caution. We don't know what we're dealing with." Chapter 4, The Shack on the Marsh. The journey was short, but felt interminable. Evelyn drove her sturdy SUV, Eleanor sitting beside her, clutching the velvet box that still held the fragile original diary. The well-manicured streets of historic Charleston slowly gave way to crumbling asphalt, then to a dirt track bordered by tangled vines and gnarled trees. The air grew heavy, humid, carrying the distinct scent of salt marsh. The map led them to a thick copse of ancient drooping willows. Hidden behind them, almost swallowed by the encroaching vegetation, was the shack. It was small, ramshackle. Wooden planks bleached silver by years of sun and rain were rotting. The roof sagged. Windows were broken, dark hollows staring out like vacant eyes. It looked like a place time had forgotten, or perhaps deliberately erased. Eleanor stepped out of the car, her gaze sweeping over the dilapidated structure. Memories, faint and hazy, flickered. Her grandfather's warnings, the hushed tones when the Folly Shack was mentioned. A place of strange occurrences. A place where the veil between worlds felt thin. Evelyn approached cautiously, her phone flashlight cutting through the gloom. "It's quite dilapidated. I'm not sure it's safe to enter, Mrs. Vance." "It has to be," Eleanor murmured, her eyes fixed on the shack. "This is it. I know it." They found a door, hanging precariously on a single hinge. With a gentle push, it groaned open, revealing an interior consumed by shadows. The air inside was thick with dust, dampness, and the faint, sweet scent of decay. Cobwebs thick as shrouds hung from the rafters. The floor was dirt. A single rickety wooden table stood in the center, almost swallowed by dust. Eleanor's gaze swept the small space. Nothing. Just emptiness. A profound disappointment settled in her chest. Had they come all this way for nothing? Was it just a random glitch, a cruel twist of fate? Then her eyes landed on something in the corner, obscured by a pile of decaying burlap sacks. Something small, wooden, dark with age. "There!" she exclaimed, her voice cracking with sudden excitement. She moved towards it, Evelyn right behind her. It was a wooden box, hand-carved, simple, but Eleanor knew it. She knew it instantly. A pang of recognition, sharp and poignant, shot through her. "The memory box," she whispered, reaching out a trembling hand. "My grandmother, she made it for me when I was a little girl. We kept little treasures in it. Special stones, a dried flower, a tiny bird's feather. She thought it had been lost or stolen years ago. Another cherished memory vanished, like Thomas." The box was heavy, surprisingly so. She brushed away the dust. The wood was smooth beneath her fingertips. A faint carving on the lid, a stylized sun, and beneath it, almost invisible, a single letter, T. Thomas. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. This was the connection. This was why the coordinates had led them here.
Evelyn, her face pale, watched silently. The air in the shack seemed to thicken. She unfolded the paper. It was a letter. The handwriting, small, a little clumsy. A child's hand. Her breath hitched. "My dearest Mama, I know you're worried. I know you're sad. But I found the shimmering passage. The whispers, they showed me. A man. He looked so old, but his eyes were kind. He said he was my great-great-grandfather. He showed me things, so many things, a different time. He said I had to go, to save something important for our family, a secret. He said I would come back when the time was right, when the stars aligned. Don't cry, Mama. I'm not lost. I'm just on a journey, a long journey. I left you a key. In the book, the one about the old trees, under my bed. It's for the special place. You'll know when you find this. And Mama, don't forget me. I love you. Your loving son, Thomas. A key. Under his bed? In the book about old trees. A specific book. Eleanor remembered it vividly. A book on native Charleston flora. Thomas had loved that book. She had kept it. All his things, every single one, packed away, preserved. The tears flowed freely now. Not tears of sorrow, but tears of a strange, aching relief. He wasn't lost. He wasn't gone. He had traveled across time to another dimension. It was unbelievable, absurd. But the letter, the memory box, the coordinates, the diary, it all clicked into place. A crazy, impossible, beautiful puzzle. Evelyn, seeing Eleanor's profound emotional reaction, gently touched her arm. Mrs. Vance, are you all right? Eleanor looked up, her face streaked with tears, but a faint, almost beatific smile playing on her lips. He's not lost, Evelyn. My son. He's not lost. He's on a journey. Chapter 5. The Library's Secret. The silver locket in the box felt cold against Eleanor's palm. She opened it. Inside, a tiny, faded photograph of a young woman, Eliza, her great-grandmother, and beneath it, a smaller inscription, barely visible. When the path diverges, the heart guides. A message from Eliza, through time. Eleanor and Evelyn returned to the Vance house. The air, heavy with unspoken wonder, filled the car. Eleanor still felt the trembling in her hands, the echoes of Thomas's childlike script. The book about old trees, Eleanor murmured almost to herself. It's in the attic, with all his things. They ascended to the attic, a silent pilgrimage. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and forgotten dreams. Eleanor moved directly to a large cedar chest. It contained Thomas's childhood treasures, his favorite toy soldiers, his worn teddy bear, and atop a stack of books, there it was, Trees of the Low Country. She pulled it out, her fingers tracing the familiar spine. Slowly, reverently, she opened it to the first page. Tucked within the brittle leaves, a small, ornate brass key glinted. Not a house key, something else. The key, she whispered, holding it up. Evelyn, still reeling from the discovery at the shack, stared. What do you think it's for? Eleanor's gaze drifted to the locket, then back to the diary on the table. And then the diary, Eliza's diary, the symbols, the coordinates, it all points to a larger narrative, a family secret, not just about Thomas. Eleanor's mind raced, piecing together fragments of old family lore, whispers of her ancestors, known for their eccentricities, their unusual insights, tales of hidden chambers, secret passages in old Charleston homes, and always a mention of the Vance family's deep connection to the land, to the ancient energies of the city. The library, Eleanor said, suddenly, a flash of inspiration. Our family. We were among the founders of the Charleston Public Library. There's a special collections room with a small, private vault for historical documents belonging to founding families.
Evelyn's eyes lit up. A vault? That makes sense. A secure place for something incredibly important? They drove to the Charleston Public Library. The grand neoclassical building stood as a testament to knowledge and history. Eleanor, a longtime patron and donor, was well known. They were granted access to the special collections. The air in the special collections room was cool, hushed, filled with the scent of aged paper. Row upon row of ancient volumes lined towering shelves. In a quiet corner, behind a heavy oak door, was the vault, a formidable, old-fashioned safe crafted from dark, burnished steel, stood against one wall. Eleanor approached it, the brass key heavy in her hand, her heart hammered with anticipation. This was it, the culmination of 45 years of searching, the answer to a lifetime of questions. The key slid into the lock with a soft click. The heavy door swung open, revealing a small, dark interior. Inside, a single, flat, leather-bound folder. Eleanor reached in and pulled it out. The leather was supple, smooth. She opened it. Inside, another letter. This one typewritten. And much, much longer. It was dated just last month. My dearest Mama, if you are reading this, then the threads have finally aligned. The diary, the coordinates, the memory box, the path. It all came to pass exactly as foreseen. My heart aches that I cannot truly be with you, not in the way you remember, not yet, but know that I am here. Always. When I was 6, I stumbled upon a tear in the fabric of time, an aperture, a shimmer. The garden, as you know, sits on a powerful ley line. Our ancestors, particularly Eliza, knew of its significance. They guarded it. They interacted with it. They called it the passage. It's why the family has always been drawn to this spot, to this house. It's why the strange occurrences have always happened here. My great-great-grandfather, a brilliant but eccentric man named Elias, met me there. He was from Eliza's time, but he had also traveled. He showed me glimpses of the future. He spoke of a critical moment, a vulnerability, a threat to our family's legacy. A powerful force, unseen but felt, sought to unravel the timeline, to erase specific historical truths. And the key to preserving those truths, he explained, lay in the original diary, Eliza's diary. Not just its historical records, but the esoteric knowledge she encoded within it. The symbols, Mama, the patterns, they are not merely code for human eyes. They are resonance points, frequencies, meant to activate something, to protect something. I knew I had to go, to prepare, to understand, to become the person capable of defending what was ours. Elias guided me through the passage. He taught me. He trained me. I lived a parallel existence, a life in the future, yet rooted in the past. I studied physics, temporal mechanics, ancient languages, all to understand the nature of the passage and the intricate, delicate balance of our family's role within it. The diary, Mama, was becoming unstable. Its physical integrity was failing, yes, but more importantly, the encoded energy within it was fading. The very historical record it held, the truth of our ancestors' fight against those who wished to erase their memory, was at risk. The digital restoration was crucial, not just to preserve the words, but to reactivate the inherent properties of the coded symbols, to amplify their resonance. I've been watching you, Mama, from a distance, painfully. You wouldn't recognize me. My appearance has changed. My life has been accelerated in a way. I became a scholar, a historian, focused on esoteric texts, on the hidden energies of the Low Country. I even published papers under a pseudonym, hoping to guide the right minds towards the truth, towards people like Dr. Reed. My arrival, or rather my re-entry into your direct timeline, was timed precisely. The digital glitch, as Dr. Reed called it, was my doing.
A beacon, a direct transmission through the reactivated frequencies of the restored diary. I needed you to find the memory box, to read the letter, to finally understand. And now, the last piece of the puzzle, the most painful. I cannot stay. Not yet. My work is not done. The forces that seek to unravel our past are growing stronger. I must continue to prepare, to watch, to intervene when necessary. My true return, my permanent return, is still in the future. But know this, I am your son, always,
and I love you more than words can say. The time for a full reunion will come, when the balance is restored, when the family legacy is truly safe. But there is one more thing, a physical connection, a token. I have a small, tarnished, brass compass. It was Elias's. He told me it belonged to Eliza. She hid it for me. It's an heirloom, a marker. When you see it again, held by a man who seems familiar yet unknown, you will know it is me. You will know your son has truly returned. Live well, Mama. Know peace, and know that I am always looking out for you. With endless love and anticipation, Thomas Vance. Eleanor finished reading. Her hands trembled not with fear, but with a profound, overwhelming sense of wonder and sorrow. Her son, her beautiful, lost boy. He wasn't lost at all. He was a guardian, a traveler through time, a secret warrior protecting their family's past. A tear rolled down her cheek, landing on the letter, blurring a word. Evelyn, who had been silently watching, her face a mask of awe and disbelief, finally spoke. "Mrs. Vance, this is," she started, her voice a hushed whisper. "This is beyond anything I've ever encountered. This is impossible." "Impossible?" Eleanor echoed, a faint, sad smile gracing her lips. "Perhaps, but it's Thomas, and it's real." She folded the letter carefully, placing it back in the folder. The old diary, the memory box, the letters, they weren't just artifacts anymore. They were conduits, connectors, to a reality far grander, far more complex than she had ever imagined. Chapter 6. A Glimpse of Forever. Weeks turned into months. Eleanor carried the knowledge of Thomas's journey, his incredible truth, like a precious, fragile secret. It brought her peace, a quiet calm she hadn't known in decades. The frantic searching, the gnawing anxiety had been replaced by a deep, almost spiritual understanding. He was out there, protecting, preparing, loving. Evelyn, on the other hand, was profoundly changed. Her scientific worldview had been shattered, then reassembled into something far more expansive. She devoured every book on temporal physics, on ley lines, on ancient encryptions. She began her own research, discreetly, into the anomalies within the Charleston historical record. The digital glitch of the coordinates had opened a doorway in her mind, a thirst for knowledge that transcended conventional science. She often visited Eleanor, asking questions, seeking insights, and finding in Eleanor's quiet wisdom a guide through the labyrinth of the inexplicable. Eleanor spent her days in the garden, no longer just a place of loss, but a place of connection. She looked at the ancient live oaks, their branches draped with Spanish moss, and imagined the shimmering passage, the gateway Thomas had described. She felt his presence there, a comforting warmth in the humid air. One breezy autumn afternoon, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues, Eleanor sat on her favorite bench in the garden. A gentle sea breeze rustled the leaves. A familiar scent, faint but distinct, reached her. Old parchment. And something else. Something like ozone, like distant lightning. She looked up. A figure stood by the old willow tree at the edge of the garden. A man, tall, lean, his back to her. He was studying the ancient tree, his head tilted. Something about his posture, a familiarity, a resonance. He turned slowly.
He was in his late 40s, perhaps early 50s. His hair, once light, was now a distinguished silver at the temples. His face,
lined with experience, etched with a quiet intensity. His eyes, deep blue, so familiar, so like her own, and like Thomas's. But he was a stranger. Eleanor's mind screamed that. 45 years had passed. Children grow. They change. He carried a small, tarnished brass compass in his hand. He held it gently, his thumb tracing the faint engravings on its surface. He looked up, his gaze meeting hers. A profound sadness and an equally profound love shone in his blue eyes. Eleanor felt a jolt. The letter! When you see it again, held by a man who seems familiar yet unknown, you will know it is me. A gasp escaped her lips. Her heart, which had been beating so steadily for months, now hammered wildly. It was him. It had to be him. He took a step towards her, then another. He smiled, a faint, almost sorrowful smile. "Mama?" he whispered, his voice a rich baritone, but with an underlying tremor. The voice of a grown man. Her son. Eleanor stood, her legs suddenly weak. Tears welled again, but these were different. They were tears of recognition, of reunion, of a lifetime's longing finally reaching its impossible fulfillment. "Thomas?" Her voice was a fragile whisper, barely audible. He nodded, his eyes shining. "It's me." He walked towards her, slowly, deliberately. She watched him, studying every line of his face, the familiar curve of his nose, the faint scar above his left eyebrow from a childhood tumble. Yes, it was him. Older, wiser, a stranger, yet profoundly her own. He stopped a few feet from her. He looked at her, his gaze filled with an aching tenderness. I can't stay, Mama. Not yet. The threads are still delicate." Eleanor's heart clenched. She knew, she had read his letter. The truth was painful. But seeing him, standing before her, it was enough, for now. "I know, my love," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I understand." He reached out, his hand hovering, almost touching her arm, then pulling back. I just needed you to see, to know that I'm real, that I'm well, that I'm fighting for our legacy." He looked down at the brass compass in his hand. This was Eliza's. It holds the resonance, the key to the passage. Eleanor nodded, her eyes fixed on his face, trying to commit every detail to memory, this fragile moment, this impossible encounter. "The diary. It helped," he said, his voice tinged with gratitude. "Your persistence, Dr. Reed's brilliance, it reactivated the ancient frequencies. It made this possible." He looked towards the sunset, a deep melancholy in his eyes. "My time here is brief. I'm needed elsewhere, but I wanted you to have peace, Mama, to know." Eleanor stepped forward, defying the unspoken barrier between them. She reached out, her hand finding his. His skin was warm, real, solid, a physical connection across the vastness of time and mystery. He squeezed her hand gently. "You were always so strong, Mama. Always. That's why I knew you would understand. You would believe." A single tear rolled down his cheek. He looked at her one last time, a gaze that spoke of centuries of love and longing. Then, slowly, imperceptibly, he began to fade, not like a ghost, but like light dimming, like a memory becoming more translucent. Eleanor clung to his hand, desperate to hold on to him, but his fingers slipped through hers like smoke. His form became less distinct, his eyes, though still fixed on hers, seemed to recede into the deepening twilight. "I love you, Thomas," she cried, her voice tearing. His faint smile lingered. "I love you too, Mama." And then he was gone, The space where he stood was empty. The air felt normal again. The scent of ozone vanished. Only the gentle sea breeze remained.
Her heart ached. The sorrow was profound, but beneath it, a radiant, quiet joy. He was real. He was alive. He was her son, and he had come back, even if only for a fleeting, impossible moment. She slowly lowered her hand, looking at the familiar garden. It was no longer just a garden. It was a threshold, a place where time bent, a place of endless possibilities. The diary, now safely back on its mahogany table, shimmered faintly in the last rays of light, a silent testament, a whisper from the past echoing into the future. And Eleanor Vance, the keeper of secrets, the mother of a time-traveling son, finally found her peace. The path had diverged, but her heart, indeed, had guided her home. Evelyn, arriving a few minutes later, found Eleanor sitting on the bench, a serene, almost ethereal look on her face. The compass, now resting on the mahogany table where the diary lay, caught the last glimmer of sunset. Evelyn picked it up. It felt warm, as if recently held. She looked at Eleanor. "Mrs. Vance, are you all right?" Eleanor smiled, a knowing, beautiful smile. "Yes, Evelyn, I am. Everything makes sense now." She looked at the compass in Evelyn's hand. "Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved with logic, my dear. Some are meant to be felt, to be believed." Evelyn looked at the compass, then back at Eleanor, a new understanding dawning in her intelligent eyes. She didn't need words. The profound peace on Eleanor's face, the faint warmth from the compass, the sheer impossibility of it all, it spoke volumes. The story of the Vance family was far from over. It had just truly begun. And Evelyn Reed knew, with a certainty that transcended all scientific training, that she was now inextricably part of its unfolding. The whispers of time, they truly were endless.